Hi everyone, I am Isis with Sistah Sci-Fi, and you are watching Sistah Sci-Fi Wind Down Wednesday. I know that might be a little confusing because today week's guest, Dr. Judith Joseph. Yay!
Hello, how are you? It's so good to see
I'm
you.
good. It's so good to see you too. Sometimes I need to rejoin for it to work, so
Yes.
I'm sorry about the confusion. Okay. Um, we see hey from New Jersey and all that good stuff. So before we dive in, Judith, Dr. Judith Joseph, I'll ask you how you're doing, but I'll also ask the people who are watching on Instagram, let us know how you're doing in the chat. So Judith, Dr. Judith Joseph, how are you?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. I mean, yes, I know you're good, but you're traveling. How's your week been? How's your 2025 been?
It's been very busy. Hey, from New Jersey. Nice of you to join. I'm from Jersey too. How has your 2025 been?
If I'm honest, I'm still getting my feet under me. Um, like in terms of the election, in terms of executive orders, in addition to running Sister Sci-Fi, I run a nonprofit independent feminist press.
Mm.
So we're deeply impacted by that. So yeah, as I say a lot, I'm taking it day by day.
Yeah, I know it's been a very surprising year so far, but hopefully this book helps people to find joy even in difficult times, right? Hi from Australia. Wow. What time is it there?
It's really late. And I also want to say hey to Beauty in a book retreat. I know every time I get online, I'm like, I owe you email, but the email is coming. New York Diva says, New York here and surviving. Heard regarding surviving. So
Yes.
it's all the time for conversations about navigating these unprecedented times. Um, to use a very hackneyed term, tell us about high functioning.
Well, the person in New York City who's just surviving, let me tell you, what you're doing is you're validating how you're feeling, right? So Isis came on and she said, it's been a hard year. And, you know, we validated that. And that's really one of the first steps to actually finding joy is validating how you feel. Even if it's like quote unquote the negative emotions, that's okay. Because like many times, you know, in on other conversations, if you were to be asked how you're doing, probably if you didn't know me, you'd be like, "Oh, I'm good," like, but you know me and saying how you're really feeling and me acknowledging it and validating that is so important. Somebody said booked and busy. Much love.
That's Beauty in a Book Retreat. They stay booked and busy. So yes, yes. Uh, I'm in top. Yeah, and so it's 11 a.m. in Australia, so not as late as I thought. So that's good to know. Chocolate Butterfly says, preparing to compete in Toastmasters International Speech Area Contest. So yes, we are praying for you, meditating for you. You got this. Um, I'll go to a question. So I haven't read High Functioning yet. I'm very excited to read it. But what I'm excited about is sometimes emotions and psychology is not considered a science, but you did a lot of research on your book. You did groundbreaking research. So tell us about the science behind your research, since we're a science fiction and fantasy throughout here. So we're excited about the science.
So I love that you have a science audience because one of the quotes of my lab, my happiness lab in New York City, is understand the science of your happiness because there's only going to be one ISIS ever, right? If you think about it, in the history of the universe, there's only going to be one you, right? In the future of the universe, there's only going to be one you. So like, why are we trying to fit our happiness into models without understanding the science of our own happiness, right? And I think that that's where like I start the book, like understand what makes you you. So like in my book, I talk about ways for you to understand how your past pain, your past experiences shaped you. And the reason I wanted to make a book like this is because there aren't many psychiatrists out there, right? So like in some parts of the country, there's like one psychiatrist for every 30,000 people.
Oh, wow.
And so many of us, yeah, many of us are just kind of like using tools that we see without understanding how those tools should really be applied to our unique science. And so the first part of the book is really helping readers to understand the science of your happiness, right? And what does that mean? Like we're all, yeah, we're all humans, but just because we're all humans doesn't mean that we don't have different experiences that shape who we are today. And like I want people to feel as if when they're going through this book, they're like, oh, I understand why I'm like this. Now that I understand the science of what makes me me, then I can understand the science of how to make a happier me. And and
Mm,
and the
mm,
research that I'm doing in my lab looks at things like what is happiness? Because there's a term called anhedonia that people don't even know they're experiencing. I think that the majority of human beings experience anhedonia, which is like a feeling of meh or blah, and they don't know why they feel like that. And so I break down the science of that because in order to understand why you feel a lack of joy, which is anhedonia, you need to understand what makes you happy. And so the book
mm.
really takes a deep dive into that.
So what? I'm like, there's so many questions. I'm like, what is a happiness lab? Like I've heard of like a sleep lab but before we go to that, so we talk about your research and we talk about like where you start the book, but what were some of your working hypotheses when you started your research? And what were some of the things that you did the research and you started looking at the results and you're like, oh, this was my working hypothesis, but now that I've run the experiments, now that I've looked at the data, my some of my working hypotheses have changed.
Yeah, so like when I first started the research, I was looking at something that most therapists will say isn't real, right? High functioning depression. Because in mental health, we tend to focus on people who are in crisis, and that's important. We tend to focus on people who've broken down and who are no longer functioning. And yes, that is important. But we don't look at the people who are pathologically productive, who are going around every day, getting their job done, showing up for others, being the rock, So they're wearing this mask of productivity and they're busying themselves. And my hypothesis was that under that facade of productivity, there's trauma that may be hidden, right? Like people don't necessarily process trauma. And we all went through a collective trauma in 2020, right? Like we went through something that was very uncertain. We were told that we were safe one minute, then we were told we were unsafe the next minute. Then all these things happen in the world and things continue to happen in the world that we have no control over. But what do? We don't process it. We just push through. We just go business as usual. Oh, like I don't agree with this political thing. Business as usual. We just push, 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 push. And that's why a lot of us are just feeling numb. We feel empty. We feel restless when we're not working, we feel empty. When we're not busy, we feel numb. So we end up doing things that may not be the healthiest for us, like being on screens too long, right? Like drinking too much, maybe working too much, right? And or we don't acknowledge our pain and we physically break down and we don't know why we have like an autoimmune issue when like our body's like under constant stress that's not processed. So my hypothesis was that people who push through pain are likely distracting themselves from
Mm.
something painful, right? And in my lab, I also do trauma research. And one of the symptoms of trauma is avoidance of pain, avoidance of the thing that's painful. And people don't connect the two. They don't think that them being pathologically productive and busy is actually an avoidance of dealing with a painful issue. But in my study, what I found was that all people who identified as having high function depression had some trauma that was unprocessed. And so I wanted them to understand how this past trauma shaped who they are and why they are this way. Again, that's like understanding the science of your happiness, understanding the science of your pain, because you can't have happiness without pain. You can't have joy without sadness.
Mm.
And so my hypothesis was actually correct.
Got it. So why? No, yeah. So then my next question is, where's where does productivity become pathological? So when is, I mean, in a society that really rewards productivity, when is it like good productivity? When does it become pathological? Is it pathological when I'm avoiding something, or yeah? How do you define that in the book?
Yeah, in the book, when you're so productive that you're missing out on the points of joy, I call it, are you a human doing or are you a human being? And that tends to hit certain people a certain way because they're like, oh, I get it, right? If that if that mantra resonates with you, then it's like, wow. Because like when you take the assessments in the book, the free assessments that I created based on the like over 10 years of research, then you see where you're lacking joy, right?
Mm.
So like you take the anhedonia assessment and you see that, wait, I don't enjoy food as much. Like when I eat, I just kind of shove it in. It's just to keep my body going. It's not to savor a meal, right? When I rest, it doesn't feel restful. I wake up still feeling tired. Like when I'm connecting with others, sometimes I'm like, like I just want to go home. Just want to go binge watch TV and not deal with people, right? So like so like the points of joy that make us human are like being diminished, right? And so if your pathological productivity is getting in the way of that, then you may want to think about whether or not you are pathologically productive because you're missing out on the things that really give you a sense of purpose.
Got it. Okay. And then this question before, because I really want to dive deep into the happiness lab. Um, is pathological productivity a symptom of high functioning depression? Is it a step to the path to ending up being high functionally depressed? Like, how are the two connected?
Yeah, so when people are trying to avoid their pain and avoid processing their trauma, they busy themselves, right? And what I found is that people who say that they have high function depression, they have these symptoms of depression, but they don't meet criteria for a major depressive disorder because they're still functioning, right? So if you go to your doctor and you're like, oh, like, I have poor concentration and I'm like low energy, I'm not sleeping and not really enjoying social activities and all these symptoms of depression, but then they ask you the final question, which is, are you functioning? And you say yes. They'll say, well, come back when you're not functioning, which is a broken model, right? Because we're basically waiting for people to break down versus shoring people up, having them have quality of lives that are enriched, preventing a breakdown, right? But our medical system is not set up that way. We're set up to only care for people once they've lost functioning or in crisis.
Right.
And my argument is that why are we waiting for people to break down? Why aren't we doing something about this before they break down, right? But that's just not how our system is set up. Now, there is this renaissance in physical health
Hmm.
called longevity science, right? Where like people are actually being preventative. They're like saying, don't wait till you have a heart attack. Let's see these markers for heart disease, right? Or don't wait until your bones waste. Let's get you on hormone therapy so that you prevent osteoporosis. But there's nothing like that happening in mental health, right? And my theory is that I think there's a lack of this proactiveness because there aren't that many of us out there. Like,
Right.
you know how it is. Like when you go to look for a therapist, you're like on a wait list for like 6 months. And the data shows that that's how it is. Like to see a psychiatrist, you're waiting weeks,
Right.
So like if you really want to do something about this crisis that we're seeing, we have to prevent it. And so my goal is to provide basically, the science that's taught in my practice, in my lab, to everyone so that they can learn about the science of their happiness and so that they can prevent a mental health breakdown, prevent a mental health crisis, because we should be thinking about prevention. So my focus is on the productive people, the people who haven't lost functioning, right? Because right now, psychiatry and mental health is geared towards those who have lost functioning. But
Right.
my argument is let's shore up, let's support the people who are productive so that they can continue, right? So that they don't go into crisis.
How did this become your area of research?
So in my lab, I was one of the researchers studying, conditions where people break down. And then after 2020, I kept on seeing people who were coming in and using that DSM, the Bible of Psychiatry. They were meeting all the criteria for, let's say, depression, right? But then when I got to the final questions, are you having a loss of functioning or are you in significant distress? They'd be like, no. But yeah, yeah, but something doesn't feel right. And I was like, oh, well, you don't meet criteria, so I can't really do anything. And I thought, well, I'm a part of the problem if I'm doing that, right? Like, why are we thinking about things this way? Why am I waiting for you to break down and to be in distress or crisis to actually
Uh,
address these symptoms? And I thought, I wonder how many people are experiencing this. So, and this is before I was really big on socials and I was creating content and I was like, let me create what I see in my lab. Like, and I didn't think anyone was going to watch it. I was like, maybe like 100 people would see it. But that reel that I made on high functioning depression has been seen over 20 million times across the world. So I was like, whoa, like it wasn't just something that I was just seeing in my lab. This is an experience that many productive, overworked people are experiencing. They just didn't have a name
Mm,
for it. I got so many DMs from therapists all over the country, all over the world saying, I think this is my patient, but there's nothing for it because it doesn't have it in our coding system, right? And my argument is that in a capitalist society, we're using a book to classify people based on data from 30 years ago. Well, the world has changed, right? Like we have more access to work, we have more access to being busy, we have more exposure to crisis than ever before. So, like, why are we using an antiquated system
mm,
to help people? We
mm.
should be thinking ahead of it. Like, wait, people are they're busy on the outside, but they're suffering on the inside. We should be supporting them before they break down.
Right. No, that's so insightful. So I'll also pause. So if you're watching and you have questions for Dr. Judith Joseph, you can drop them in the chat. I can ask questions all night. Y'all know that. But I'm sure y'all have questions about high functioning depression overall, her research and the book. So please drop them in the chat and I'll bring them into the conversation. The chocolate butterfly says, you're speaking my language. We have no emotional intelligence, but avoidance delinquency. So yeah. So then now that you have this model of high functioning depression, is is the treatment different than somebody with depression, which is usually mixed? I'm not a therapist, so possibly medication and some modality of therapy. Is it different when it's high functioning?
It's different for every individual. So at the beginning of my book, I talk about breaking down each person into the biopsychosocial. So if you've ever seen a therapist or a doctor, you probably don't know this, but they were doing a biopsychosocial model on you, right? So biology is like your genetics, like, what are you prone to? Do you have a family history of depression? Do you have a family history of ADHD? Like, what runs in your family medically? Do you medically have an issue, right? So, like, you're thinking about your unique biology, and then you're thinking about your psychology. So, do you have past trauma? Are you someone who has a certain attachment style? Do you have certain resiliency factors or a lack of resiliency, right? And then you look at the social factors. Where do you live? Are you someone who lives in a cramped situation? Are you living in a city? Are you living in a rural area? Are you exposed to toxins? Are you someone whose lifestyle socially is sedentary? Are you someone who has access to nutritious foods or processed foods, right? So you're looking at the social things. What are your relationships like? What is your job like? Is it stressful? Is it supportive? Are your relationships healthy? Are they toxic? So everyone has their own biopsychosocial, and I teach my readers how to do their own, which is super empowering because when people come to my lab, they literally draw the Venn diagram and then they fill in their biopsychosocial. I just gave a talk to about 300 women yesterday, and they did their biopsychosocial, during the talk. And basically, you're learning about what makes you you. So for some people, especially those who have a history of depression, major depressive disorder, right? They're going to continue needing their medication, right? But others, they won't. Like if they have a history of like, but look at their biology, if they have a history of like heart disease, they're going to need certain medications to help them, right? Psychologically, if you're someone who has a history of trauma, you may need some, certain supports in terms of trauma techniques so that you're not falling into like fight or flight, right? But or psychologically, if you're someone who has an avoidant attachment style and you have a hard time in relationships, you're gonna need more support there. Socially, if you're someone who works in a really busy job, and no matter what you do, the job is just like draining your life source, then you're probably gonna need to think about switching up that environment, right? Or if let's say socially you're someone who has a great job and like you live in a city but you're not getting much like access to nature, then you're probably going to need to be able to access nature. Social factors are going to be different for each person. So in my book I talk about how you can support each of your biopsychosocial buckets depending on what's causing the most stress. So for example, if you're someone who has like an autoimmune condition, right? I'm not going to focus on like your social and your psychological as much as like getting your body's immune reactions down. So you may want to work with a specialist, right? You may want to like partner with someone who helps you with like, getting the inflammation levels down, right? But let's say biologically you're physically healthy, psychologically you don't have a history of trauma, but socially you're in a really toxic relationship. I'm not going to tell you to go and do trauma work. I'm going to tell you to like get that person out of your life, right? So, and then again, if you're someone biologically who's stable, socially stable, but psychologically you have unprocessed trauma that it's weighing you down and making you go into fight or flight, then you're going to probably need to do some work there. So everyone's so different. And that's why I love this model, because you realize that all humans have a biopsychosocial, but everyone's path is different. So yes, we're all humans, but we all are so unique because there's only one you, right? There will only ever be one you. So I want people to understand their own science and then apply these 5 tools in my book to your own science. And the 5 tools are, I use 5 because most of us have 5 fingers, so it's easy to remember. And like I always think about 5, like joy is built into our DNA, so it's like within reach. And if we practice at least one of these 5 V's daily, we can improve our joy points every day.
Okay, I'm ready. 5. So, yes.
I'll take you to the 5 V's. So
Okay.
the first one is um, validation. So accept how you feel, which is really hard to do for people who are busy. The second is venting, express how you feel, and there are different ways to vent. The third is values. So tap into things that are priceless, not things with price tags. The fourth is vitals, and there are all these different ways to support your mind body because you only have one mind and body. And the fifth is vision. How do you plan joy every day? And how do you plan joy for the future so that you don't get stuck in the past? And I go through each of these 5 things in the book. And I don't want you to practice all of them at once, but if you practice 1 or 2 daily, just tap into it. The research shows that you're increasing your points of joy every day.
I like that. I like that. Okay, I'm gonna like create a blog about that and refer to that a lot. So April says, "This is so helpful, Dr. Judith. I'm going through this now. I need to purchase your book." You don't. I mean, not to put needs or shoulds on anybody, but if you decide you would like to pre-order the book, which comes out this April, the link is in the chat, and I'll drop it again. It is available on Sister Sci-Fi, and Dr. Judith has been kind enough to provide signed book plates so Sister Sci-Fi can offer autographed copies of the book. And if we're super lucky, this is super lucky, Dr. Judith will do an in-person event in the Bay Area sometime close to the book launch. I'm still putting that in the universe. So let's talk about the happiness lab. I mean, so like when people go to the happiness lab, what happens? Is it like a Katy Perry music video? Like I don't know.
Well, we take them through. So the lab is actually where we conduct like clinical studies, but we take them through each of the 5 V's in real time with all of our lab researchers. So each of our researchers take the participants through the lab and understand the science of their happiness, and then teach them how to apply the 5 V's in their lives so that they can go on and keep practicing it. Because what we found is that there's a disconnect between research and the real world. So like in the real world, people go, they go into like therapy, they go into treatment thinking, I just want to be happy. But in research, we don't use the word happy. We're all about like decreasing your points of sadness and depression, right? So there's like a disconnect. And we wanted people to understand what if we flipped it? And instead of saying we're decreasing your points of depression, how about we increase your points of joy? And that way, rather than saying, okay, I'm going to wait until I get a house or a car or a partner to be happy. We're like, no, let's reframe happiness because the research and the science shows that once you get all those goals, you're still not happy, right? Like, a lot of people feel like, oh, once I like leave this job and then I start my own business and I become an entrepreneur, I'm going to be happy. But then when they find that they get all the things they want, then they're still not happy. Then they keep saying, well, okay, well, then when I get these hires and I get this, then they're still not happy. And it's always like chasing this idea of happiness. But in our lab, we show you how to reframe it so that rather than chasing happy, you're all about getting happier, which is a very small shift. But if you can actually increase your points of joy every day, you're overall happier. And what I mean by points of joy is that, yes, my lab is in New York City, and we're actually holding our first C-suite happiness event on the 22nd. So you can go to my website and learn how to attend. If you can't come in person, there's virtual attendance. But So basically, we teach people how to increase their points of joy every day. So what does that mean, right? So if you're feeling lonely, connect with someone, right? If you're hungry, eat, but actually savor your meal. If you're thirsty, like get some water. If you're tired, rest. And you think, oh, well, those are just sensations. But in the research, when we add up happiness, we're adding up all these points of joy in everyday human experiences that we kind of just brush aside and we don't take the time to explore. And if you reframe happiness that way, then happiness is actually within reach, right? You're not holding your breath to be happy once you get this goal. You're actually becoming happier every day. But people need reminders of this. And, when I give these talks to large rooms, people are like, oh my gosh, like I never thought about that way, right? It's a different mind shift. Oh, and I see that Book Bar TT is on here. They're like a Trinidadian based bookstore, and hopefully I get to do an event with them in Trinidad, my home country. So thanks for joining.
I'm so happy you're here. And I'm holding that for you too. Um, and I think that's right. I think sometimes when we move through the world, we're looking for the big magic bullet or success metric, as opposed to what are small steps we can do to access that sense of wellness and contentment. Um, do your do your patients or do the people you talk to ever push back and say, but what you're saying is just complacency, and I'm an ambitious go-getter and I'm not trying to be complacent? That not my words. It's really just a question of point of curiosity.
What the complacency, I think what you're describing is something called anhedonia. And what it is a lack of, it literally means anhedonia. An is lack of, hed is pleasure, and like onia is like the condition. It's a very old term, and most people don't even know it exists. And I'm trying to like bring that word into like the everyday language, right? Like, so rather than being like, you're like, I'm feeling anhedonia, right? I'm like not enjoying life. I'm not enjoying being a human right now. So let me tap into things that bring me joy. Let me go on a walk and let me like observe nature. And by going out and observing nature and by walking, you're actually increasing this dopamine in your brain. When you come into the lab, we show you about dopamine and what happens to your brain when you engage in these very basic things that we take for granted, right? Like putting the phone down, because every time we look at a phone, and in my book, I talk about what technology does to us in terms of causing anhedonia. But every time we're like getting these hits of dopamine from a place that doesn't actually stimulate other senses, what we're doing is we're training our brain to just get accustomed to these highs. And after a while, your brain will plateau. You're not going to get the high anymore. You start to feel numb. But if you retrain your brain, because we can't not use technology, we need it, right? Like technology is so important for like spreading information, building community, but we don't have to have the relationship with technology that we do, this nonstop, exposure. And we don't have to sacrifice other ways to access joy, right? Just for one modality, one mode of getting dopamine. So I talk about how to retrain your brain so that you're not having anhedonia, and so that instead you're having the opposite of that, which is feeling happier, feeling more joy.
I love that so much. So I'll bring in some of the comments. Um, what should a person do when they feel stuck, like melancholy, where you're not unhappy but not exactly sad?
So this is, again, this is not medical advice. I can't give advice over, this is not a patient-doctor relationship, but in my book, I do talk about different ways that you can tap into things that used to bring you joy in the past. And so, that melancholy that a lot of people experience, this lack of joy, this like mutedness, is because they're not accessing things that used to bring them joy. And many times we forget what it is that brought us joy. And so in my book, I talk about different ways to tap into that so that you find what used to bring you happiness. And if you're like, well, I can't remember, which is something I hear a lot as a therapist, like, because when you've had pain in your past, your brain does this really very smart thing where it dampens your memory, right? So, like, if there's a very painful time in your past, your brain will actually try to forget it for you so that you don't feel pain, right? And so that's why a lot of people who survive traumatic experiences will be like, oh, that was like blurry, right? Many of us say like 2020 was a blur. Well, there's no wonder why, because our brain is trying to shield us from it, because short term it helps to get through and to survive and to eat and to sleep and to get things done, take care of your families. But long term, that unprocessed trauma and pain sneaks up in very odd ways, right? It may cause some people to have physical breakdowns, right? Or it can make some people feel really irritable in situations. They're like, why am I feeling so irritable, right? Or it makes people not enjoy things, right? So that's why it's important to realize that sometimes you can't remember certain parts of your past because of trauma. But there are exercises that I provide in the book that helps people to tap back into their past in very creative ways so that they can find joy again.
Mm, I love it. So one question that we have is more career advice. How do I pursue my career in MSc CP for corporate? A master's in clinical psychology to work in corporate. So they can choose what PhD program to go to. Um, just asking. Totally okay if we just have to take that question offline.
I mean, it's always great to have mentors who are already doing that and then asking them how they did it, because, usually you don't have to reinvent the wheel if you talk to people who've been there. And like that's one of the things I talk about in my book, is like the importance of mentorship and having people to support you.
Great response. Amani Kani, yes, this will be recorded. The full thing will be posted on Instagram and on YouTube, and then we'll be posting sound bites, like highlights from the conversation throughout the next couple of months. Chocolate Butterfly, I did repost the link, so you should see it in the chat. And same to you, New York Diva. With that, where was I going next? Um, I got just lost my train of thought. So what was the process in like taking your research, working with clients who had high functioning depression, and then writing a book?
I mean, it was really based on 10 years of studies and like the research, right? Because I had a hypothesis and I didn't really know what was going to happen, but but based on what I've done, all my life, I had an idea as to what I would be able to see. Some things were really surprising. Some of the things that were found in the study were that people who are caregivers tend to have high level of anhedonia, right? So think about the mom, the single mom who's like taking care of everyone but herself, who's like passing out on her own joys in life, who's not really tapping into her body every day, right? Because she's pouring into others. Like that's someone who's at high risk for high functioning depression. They can't afford to break down, right? A lot of BIPOC communities, right? Like, if you're the only person that looks like you at your job, you don't want to slow down, because what if people say, well, well, we shouldn't have hired this person, right? Like, then you start, the weight of the world is on you as an underrepresented individual, right? Because you don't want to seem as if you're not competent, and you don't want to let your community down. You kind of feel as if like you have to show up, even if you're not feeling well, because you don't want to be the person that disappoints your community and just like fits into the stereotype of like, why, how did you get here? How did you get into this role? So I feel like a lot of people will feel seen in this work, right? The people that are entrepreneurs who like don't ever want to go through bankruptcy, who have staff teams to provide for, and they feel as if they have to continue being productive even if they're in pain. So I wanted to allow them to feel seen and validated, and to have tools so that they feel as if they're not alone, that they're not just surviving, that they can actually thrive.
I love those points. So I'll pause here to do a PSA. So if you click this little white arrow right here, you'll have the option to follow Dr. Judith Joseph if you haven't already. And what I love about Dr. Judith Joseph, across all the social media platforms, you talk about your research, but there's also highly accessible like TikToks and Instagram where you can see like the personifications of what you're talking about in your research. Where did that content come from? Because they're genius in how ingenious they are.
Well, I write my content on the bus on my way to work every day. And yes, I take the bus because it's New York City. And if you ever traveled or commuted in New York City, it is traffic is real. Like you will get faster on the crosstown bus than any other mode. Like I will take that challenge any day. But yeah, I started writing my content on the bus and it was like a way to pass the time, right? Again, a way for me to not engage in too much screen time and just tap into creativity and to reflect. And so I would just write and like you know, a lot of my content comes from real world, real life experience, right? As someone who has high functioning depression, who's like been pathologically productive all my life. So a lot of that is from my own experiences, but also from cases throughout the years. And, I've been a therapist for like 15 years. It's like, sounds like just saying that out loud seems like, a lot, but, over the years, I've seen so many situations and like I've treated children, adults, elderly, in some cases families, right? Because I used to work in very rural areas where like I would have to see the whole family. So like I get a lot of my inspiration from like, from life. And I was initially really nervous to do social media because I didn't want to not be taken seriously, but it's been the opposite. It's opened up so many doors for me and it's helped so many people. The best part about it is like people feeling like, how did you know this was what was going on in my life? Like, how did you see, like, how do you know this so well? Because, like, we may all be from different backgrounds, but like certain themes are the same, right? Attachment theory, you know, we think, oh, like attachment theory is like a Western model, but no, like people have had attachment to their caretakers since the beginning of like motherhood, right? Since the beginning of like offspring. And even when you look at animals, the way that they attach, right? So like we all have attachment, things like narcissism, right? Like you think, oh, like narcissism is like a Western construct. No, it's not a Western construct. There's been narcissists since the beginning of time, right? Think of all of like the the dictators, right? Like in history, and all of the very cruel people who've done terrible things to like, to civilians and to like other humans, right? Narcissism has always existed. They just called it something different, right? And when I was in training, I got a grant to do cultural psychiatry. So I like over the years, I'd studied across the globe, looking at different cultures. And you realize that these themes, they just repeat in other countries. They're just called something different. For example, when I went to India, and I sat with gurus who were talking about ego, right? And putting the ego aside, and some people can't put the ego aside. And I'm thinking, oh, that they're talking about narcissism, like they just call it something different. So I think that, we all have these human experiences. Yes, they're shaped by culture and our history, but at the end, we're really all humans, and and psychology has always been there. We just called it something different. Even when I give talks to Caribbean like populations and I talk about, mental health, sometimes they'll be like, oh, we don't talk about this right now. We don't talk about that, like, but no, actually, mental health is part of your culture. Like when you dance, when you move your body, when you're whining, you're actually activating parts of your body that are soothing, that are bringing joy, because that bilateral movement is actually helpful for you. You just didn't know that it was part of your mental health, right? When you eat in that curry and roti, you're eating that spice, that's actually decreasing the inflammation in your body. You just didn't know that that was something that's a part of your mental health. So we all have mental health, but we don't acknowledge our mental health. We don't all take care of it. And if we just knew that it was actually a part of our cultures, then we would honor it more. We would talk about it more. It wouldn't be so taboo.
I agree with that. I just want to read some of the comments. Audrey says, this is so inspiring. April says, there's a lot of conversation of how they love the generational videos, which I love so much. Like how they deal with trauma, how they deal with money, the holidays, the golden brother complex. I was like, I felt, I don't even have a brother. I was New York Diva said, I recently learned how to say no. Felt guilty at first, but secretly I was very grateful. So this brings in something that we haven't talked about. How does setting boundaries or not setting boundaries kind of relate to high functioning depression?
Well, one of the things I talk about in my book is the fact that a lot of people are people pleasers. And I have a whole chapter devoted to that and how, people who have high functioning depression tend to not have the best boundaries because they don't ever want to, again, like I talked about, the mother doesn't want to let her child down. She's the rock, the entrepreneur doesn't want to say no to that big deal because what if like you never have the opportunity again? And, as someone who's an immigrant who has a past history of scarcity, one of the things that I talk about heavily on my socials is that, you never want to slow down because what if you run out of money? What if you're in a position where you don't have resources? But a lot of that is just like unfounded, right? It's generational trauma that's passed down to us, or it's our own trauma. And it deprives us of joy, right? Because we're so busy working and accumulating that we're not actually living. And, I talk about how we can reframe that so that we aren't so afraid, so that we are actually living versus just doing. But that's something that comes up a lot. And with my generations videos that people love, it really comes from like treating different generations. Like, my youngest patient's 4, the oldest patient's like 90, right? Because I do a lot of dementia studies. But you see how differently people react to one thing, like one major thing in the world, and they all have different points of views shaped based off their experiences and their traumas, right? So I love the generations videos because there's something in there for everyone. Like when I go to events, people are like, "You're like the only creator that my grandma follows, I follow, and my daughter follows," and it's like because there's something for everyone based on like seeing patients of all different ages. And I want people to learn. I want them to learn about their mental health. I want them to learn it in a fun way because then it doesn't have to be so like complex, right? If you feel like something's too hard, you're like, oh, I don't want to learn that. But if you make it simple and fun and entertaining, people are curious and they're likely to share it. And that's important because when you learn something and it makes you feel like, oh, like I get it, I want someone else to get it too. I want someone else to feel as if they're getting a benefit. And that's how you create community. And that's also how you decrease stigma about mental health, is that if you're getting more people to talk about something mental health related, then you're decreasing the stigma and the shame and the taboo of it.
I love that. I love the conversations. I'm here for community. And it's also like decreasing this, like anything to remove shame and increase connection. We have about 6 minutes left. So I'm going to do something that brings me joy. I like to end a lot of these Wind Down Wednesdays with a this or that. New York Diva says, thank you for your work. This is gold. I say it's vibranium. It's at least vibranium, definitely platinum. Um, so we'll do a this or that. I'm going to try to make it themed into high functioning depression, but I'm also doing it on the spot. So we'll see how it goes.
Okay.
So the first one, this or that. And so the way this or that goes, I'll give you two options. You'll respond rapid fire. Then we can talk about why you picked your option. If you're watching on Instagram, feel free to put your choice in the chat and I'll bring it into the conversation. So the first, this or that, a walk in nature or meditation.
For me, a walk in nature. I
Yeah.
love to stimulate my senses, and I'm like, everybody knows I'm a flower snob. Anyone who knows me knows that my like love language is flowers. And so I love nature. I love plants. I'm surrounded by like plants right now. Like you should see this plant. It's growing so wild. Like it's like a human. We have names for our plants here. My daughter has named every plant in this house.
It's so cute. A walk in nature is very popular, so I'm here for it. The second one is um, coffee with a friend or going out to a group function.
Definitely coffee with a friend. Um, I I'm also very picky about my coffee. So right now I'm really I went to St. Martin over Christmas and I got the best Caribbean coffee and I'm like I've been rationing it like I want because it's not the same if you order online because like when you buy it in the islands it is fresh. It's like oh and they're different flavors. There's like a rum one and I just love to sit and savor it and I love to share my coffee. Like whenever I have an appearance, like my makeup artist, she loves coffee the way that I do. So like we'll sit and we'll talk about our coffees together and we'll savor it. So I love coffee with a friend.
Okay, coffee, whatever you choose, seems to always be the popular choice. So everybody's choosing coffee with their friends. Najee says, they're also admiring your plants. They're beautiful. I see you're living your best plant mama era. So love that. Well, I think so. I'll ask you a question, and then the closing this or that could be one of your choosing if you can come up with one on the spot, and if not, it's okay. Um, Trinidad or Tobago?
Oh, that's a tough one. Okay, so my mom is from Trinidad and my dad is from Tobago. Now,
Oh, I didn't. They were both from Trinidad. So, okay, this makes. Oh,
yeah.
good. Good on me.
Uh,
Okay, got it. Yeah.
it's very difficult because they're so different. Like Trinidad is just the vibe is so like the parties are amazing. Like the best party I've ever been to in my life was during Carnival in Trinidad. And it was like the I felt like I was being transported back in time to like when my ancestors were in Africa because the dancing was just fire. And then some of the people that were so strong, like they were so muscular. So then when they danced, it was almost like they weren't even like they were being like the music was just like I felt it felt very spiritual. Let's just say
Right.
that. I just felt like I was being transformed. So the culture in Trinidad is just and the food amazing. Like you go to Richard's Shark and Bake at the top of the mountain, like by the beach. But Tobago is just so like lush and quiet. So they're very opposite, like one is like bustling and busy and vibrant, and the other one is just so peaceful. So it's hard for me to choose because I love them both. And also Tobago, like the beach, like the water is like you walk into the water, it's like you can see your toes, like it's just like so clear. Whereas Trinidad, the beaches are more like what you would think of in like rainforest because there's like
Mhm.
a lot of like jungle, and the water isn't as clear. It's green, but it's not like it's not clear because it's like a rainforest, but it's clean. So just very different. It's incredible how two islands in the same country can be so different.
Awesome. And you don't have to choose, right? So it's a this or that, but you can also be like, I'm not going to choose. Um, Mystery Mom 40 says, quiet for me sounds wonderful, but both the good thing that they're close to each other, so you don't have to choose. If you go to Trinidad, you can easily go to Tobago and vice versa. Um, the link to High Functioning, again, is in the chat. If you don't follow us already, you can click the white arrow to follow us to stay abreast of all our content. Judith, this conversation was so amazing. It was great to see your face and your plant
Thank you.
baby. Um,
It's so good to see you. I hope that I get to have this conversation with you on the West Coast. So thank you
yeah,
so much for
my
supporting my mission.
100%. For me, science fiction, speculative fiction is part of like that visioning pillar of that holistic way to tap into joy. So for me, this 100 your work 100% falls into the framework of what I'm trying to do, what I think that the community that I'm part of is trying to do. So I'm happy that we're able to connect on this topic.
Thank you. I'm so happy. I love what you are doing. And the vision is so important to be able to see yourself in characters in genres like sci-fi. Personally, I'm a sci-fi geek. Like my favorite movie is The Matrix and Terminator 2. So to see sci-fi characters that look like me is just a dream. So thank you so much for supporting our community in this way.
Of course, yay. Okay, talk soon.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.